As before, Japan looked like it were winning the war. By 1944, an Allied victory already seems inevitable, if likely to be long and painful. Germany's being pushed back in Europe, the tide changing in Japan now that the U.S. is staging large-scale bombing raids there. A puzzling thing about the films of the past few years, the war is seldom mentioned, at least in comparison with the degree to which it's absorbed America's attention. From its activist studies of the American Middle, Stagecoach, and The Grapes of Wrath among them, John Ford goes on to turn out a series of war rallying films. Fellow master director Frank Capra follows a similar path, but most movies, large and small, seem to either turn the subject into a frivolous action picture or avoid it altogether. This is not so with Warren Murray's X Marks the Spot, episode 210, short subject, a public interest short about road safety. A bookish but authoritative Arthur McGee, DMV commissioner, sums up the problem from behind his desk. As cars proliferate on the home front, a curious oxymoron this, so do traffic fatalities.
And these fatal traffic accidents involving key workers in New Jersey war plants makes it imperative that we open a second front against these unnecessary losses,
says McGee, making the point that such mayhem drains resources, both people and material, from the overseas struggle. The movie moves from McGee to a milieu steeped in a bizarre but common theology, in which the souls of the recently deceased are processed through a court of law, the judge in a role approximating St. Peter's. In movies of this kind, the court is often virginally white and majestic, but not in X Marks the Spot. Here the set and costumes approximate traffic courts, and though the proportions are grander, the sense of being caught in a banal bureaucracy rather than a mystical godlike consciousness is palpable. This is maybe another way of conspicuously not mentioning the war, which meanwhile has led to the processing of quite a many hundreds of thousands of American lives. And who's on trial? Caught up in the gears of this tribunal are Joe Dokes, a driver whose carelessness at the wheel has cost him his life, and the unnamed guardian angel who failed to rescue him.
Why, I had to throw all the statistics in the book at him.
The penitent angel, once a reckless driver himself, tells the judge.
Over 256,000 cars rejected for punk steering gears, and over 800,000 cars rejected for dangerous brakes.
On one level, this is just a contrivance, a way to put narrative in the service of those who like a little quantitative evidence when evaluating an argument. But this melding of story and exposition dehumanizes Joe. Sure, he's an individual, one of God's precious creations whose eternal fate hangs on the whim of this imperial court, but he also merely lurks among the legions who've run the risk of violent death because they don't take the trouble to get their car inspected regularly.
Like a mouse through a maze. Through traffic.
Sharing Joe's anxiety, and for the same reason, is Jimmy Wilson. He's a boy on trial in I Accuse My Parents, episode 507, and this time the rap is murder. Like X Marks the Spot, I Accuse My Parents' tale is told in the service of addressing a larger social ill. Director Sam Newfield's bugbear is the cost of lenient parenting, and so the film's trajectory is as a morality tale about the social cost exacted by permissive family environments. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson have little interest in family. Dan leaves town for days at a time. He claims to be at work, but is plainly nurturing an affair. The more likable Mrs. Wilson trades time between home, where she litters the end tables with fallow booze bottles, and ritzy penthouse parties. Underlying all the alcohol abuse and infidelity is a lurking desire to exact revenge on one another for a love gone bad. The fruit of that ill-fated love is Jimmy, a high school senior desperate to pretend his family's perfectly normal. To that end, he writes a stellar essay about his mother, one that paints her dedication to hearth and home in the vaguest but most hyperbolic terms, thereby avoiding the appearance of falsehood and ignoring her many shortcomings of character entirely. The essay so transfixes his teachers and classmates that he's harangued into giving a speech about it and inviting his mother to share in the accolades. When she inevitably shows up pickled, he's subject to the unanimous derision of his peers.
She's drunk.
How shocking.
Poor Jimmy. How terrible.
Mom.
Well, hello, Jimmy. Am I late? When's the meeting start?
Come on, Mom, let's go home.
Oh, what's your hurry? Aren't you going to introduce me?
Some other time, Mom. Please, come on, let's go home.
Well, goodbye, folks. Oh, what's your hurry, Jimmy? I want to go.
He also holds down a job as a shoe salesman, in which capacity he meets Kitty, a local nightclub singer. Jimmy and Kitty are at once besotted, but their compromised lives complicate their relationship the instant it begins. Jimmy's problems are aforementioned. Kitty's involve Charles, the club owner who is wooing her and whom, in the interest of her singing career, she feels the need to lead on. Charles turns out to be working a confidence racket on the side and uses Jimmy as an unwitting bagman. All this intrigue, betrayal, and moral turpitude come across much more innocently on screen than they read in summary. Kitty's act owes little to Mae West as she stands up straight, buttons buttoned, to smilingly sigh out fetching odes to the value of fulfilling work and the magic of first kisses.
We were going this way, that way, this way, then it took us by the hand. Led us every which way, showed us the kiss way to the promised land.
Jimmy, though duped into criminality, is no delinquent. Screenwriter Harry Fraser even takes pains to portray Charles, the movie's prime malefactor, as more of a wealthy, well-mannered criminal mastermind than a coarse or violent kingpin. Mrs. Wilson's benders are more Dionysian than dark, more in the vein of the Thin Man series than The Lost Weekend or Reefer Madness. Even when the movie's cruelest, when Jimmy's love is moribund, his liberty in jeopardy, his fate at the hands of the court unclear, I Accuse My Parents still finds a way to inject lightheartedness into the proceedings by having the judge finger Mom and Dad as the real cause of Jimmy's misbehavior.
Roll.
But I accuse my parents.
We have a title! Yes. We have a title, yes!
Whoa, huh? Jimmy's certainly an odd character to turn up in a movie made in the middle of an aggressive military draft. Though soon to reach the age of conscription, he's scarcely brave or patriotic. He's not itching for a chance to pound Hitler or Tojo. He's hoping his essay will get him into a good school. Society values him as an individual, but does so by turning him against his family. The movie has a wholesome message for Mom and Dad, to be sure, about paying attention to one's children. But it has a message for young men Jimmy's age, and just a bit older, too. Many of them are coming back from Europe and Asia, and many are looking for someone to blame. Who better than Jimmy, this stunted, mewling mama's boy, and his dilettante parents? They, as much as the good Germans and the Vichy French, are responsible for the war.
Good morning, sir. There are no good mornings here. What was your name?